Hello and welcome to tonight's Meshekh Chokhmah shir. I want to start just with an overview of a different Meshekh Chokhmah than the one I originally planned on presenting, because it's clearly what Meir Simcha spent the majority of his writing on the week's parsha about. The problem is that this is a topic that we've already discussed a couple of times in the past. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of this first topic to pay tribute to what Meir Simcha thought was most important about the parsha, and then move on to the thought I actually prepared and had more to say about. So the Meshekh Chokhmah makes a very spirited argument in a number of parshios, including this one, that there's no such thing as inherent qedushah. As I said, we've discussed this a couple of times already. It may sound familiar. So if there's no inherent qedushah, then this is why, for example, Har Sinai, the second that the revelation is over, is not holy, and animals could go on it, and it's perfectly like any other place in the world. Whereas Har Moriah, where the Beis Hamikdash was, is holy eternally because we established a history with God at that place. So along the same lines, he discusses the worship of Moshe that underlied the eigel. That they thought, what did they call? They called Moshe Ha'ish Moshe, right? Who took us out of Mitzrayim. They associated Moshe with the Exodus. So they gave Moshe an inherent role that he was something more than human. And Moshe comes down the mountain, and they built this eigel to replace Moshe because they needed some holy object. And what does Moshe do? He comes down and he breaks the luchos, because this illustrates and deeply embeds in the psyche of those who watched it in shock. Here it was, Hashem wrote luchos, right? Hashem carved the luchos himself, not like the second luchos. He wrote the luchos, and Moshe breaks the luchos. Why? Because if there aren't human beings serving Hashem's will, then there's no qedushah. Even the first luchos. So the second Moshe comes down and sees that they are not doing what it says on the luchos he carried had no holiness, and he had no problem breaking them. This is why Meshekh Chokhmah says that this is why Chazal say that both the first luchos and the broken pieces of the first luchos and the whole second luchos sat in the aron under the kruvim. To remind you that it is not the first luchos are broken; they have no holiness. Second luchos have holiness only because we accepted it and followed them. It is not the kruvim on top of the aron that have some special holiness. The kruvim's holiness only derives from the Torah that is within. And the more one makes the Torah manifest, the more qedushah there is in the world. And this whole lesson of inherent holiness versus man following the Torah, imbuing something with holiness, is to his mind the whole lesson of the story of the eigel in this week's parsha. So that was just a quick overview of a topic we could have spent the whole evening on. But as I said, it overlapped too much with things we already said in the past with the Meshekh Chokhmah's interest in denying the concept of an inherent holiness. What I did want to discuss was Shemos Lamed Beis Tez Zayin. So Shemos 32:16. The pasuk says, "Valuchos Maaseh Elokim Hema." The luchos is the first one were made by God. V'amichtav michtav Elokimhu, and the script was God's script. Charus al luchos, engraved into the tablets. On this, the Meshekh Chokhmah quotes Shabbos Kuf Daled, that's 104 Amar Aleph. Amar Rav Chisda, Ksav shebeluchos nikram b'mifnim v'nikram b'bechutz. The writing that was on luchos could be written from within and from without, meaning from both sides. Kagon navuv. These are all examples which, by the way, are not actually in the luchos, but they do appear in Tanakh. Navuv, if it said nun vez, aleph vez, nun vez, vav vez on one side, on the other side you'd read buban, bez vav, bez nun. So it was not like miraculously read in the same sequence. No, it was the opposite sequence on the two sides. Rahav bahar, saru varas. So the letters went all the way through, and it could be read in each side, although on one side it would be the mirror image of the other. Kavanas HaMamar Hazeh. So the Meshekh Chokhmah continues. The intent of this mamar in the Gemara, da sagas Hashem Yisbarach v'chukei Toraso hi Chokhmah Ha'elyona. The God's wisdom and the laws of His Torah, they are some higher wisdom. Yesh ba shnei derachim. They have two ways that they could be acquired. Achas la'asiko mi'hisbonenus hamnintzai. The first is to comprehend it from the contemplating what exists. Al da shamar hanavi, like the Navi says, su'umarom einechem, lift your eyes high and see, mi bara ele, who created these? Hamotzei b'mitzbar tziva'am, who sends out their host by number. Mechulam b'shem yikra, calls each of them by name. Onim v'amitz koach, because of his great might and vast power. Ish lo nedar, no person fails to appear. Mikishar tivim ve'yosam, and from this looking at nature and what exists, kamo shenemar, like it says, malfeini nu bibehemos aretz, who gives us more knowledge than the beasts of the earth, which this Gemara is reading. It's a pasuk in the Yov, which the Gemara in Eruvin, 100b, Kufam Beis reads as, gives us wisdom from, not more wisdom than, but the wisdom from. It's the same Hebrew, me. And makes us wiser than the birds of the sky. Again, this pasuk is reading it, grants us wisdom from the knowledge from the beasts of the land, and wisdom from the birds of the sky. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says on this pasuk, Torah, had the Torah not been given, hayinu lemeidim tznius mechatul, we would have learned tznius from the cat, v'gezel minamala, and that stealing is wrong from the ant, which doesn't take the food of other ants. Arayos meyona, and forbidden relations from the dove, because doves are monogamous. Derech eretz mitarnigol, and the proper way of relations from a rooster, shemafayes, which first appeases the hen, v'achar kach boel, and only then mates. V'hu hisbonenus met. So now Meshekh Chokhmah continues. V'hu hisbonenus me'agishamim le'olam hasichlim ha'nivdolim. This is the contemplation from physical objects to the world of unattached intellects, meaning pure intellects. This is the Aristotelian metaphysics that one finds in, let's say, the Rambam, that that everything that links the physical world to God's plan is an intellect. So God has a thought, which has a thought, which has a thought, which thinks and has a thought, and so on, down until you get to the various grades of malachim, down to the spheres, in which are embedded the various planets, and so on, and down to us. So in this metaphysics, the thing above physical objects is intellects that are not attached to physical objects. And from these lofty things, elas ha'ilus, to the highest meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kederech Shechakar Avram Avinu Olav Hashalom, like the way Avram Avinu looked around at the universe, V'amar Yesh Manhig Libi Razu, and said that this palace, this city, this royal city, must have a manhig, a ruler, right? This is the way the Medrash puts it, that Avram looked around, he saw something more splendorous than a palace. If a person sees a palace, of course they'd assume that there was a king living in the palace. And similarly, he looked around the world and concluded that there must be a ruler. There's something, though, I want to point out in the Meshekh Chokhmah's choice of using this Gemara in Eruvin. So I'm going to take a little detour because I found it interesting. I hope somebody else does. There's a famous Gemara that says that that we learn the Torah in the womb with a malach, and then and then the malach taps us and we forget everything we learn. And the question is, what is the point of learning everything if you're going to forget it before you're born anyway? And the idea is that it means that learning Torah in this life is an act of remembering something you already knew. And that is easier than learning it from scratch. Now, what's interesting about this Medrash, if you look at a little historical context, is that Plato says something similar. So Plato believes that people can only learn from the senses. So how does he explain how people learn mathematical truths? Their own, truths about geometry, or ideals, truths about math, that 1 + 1 = 2, no matter 1 watt and 1 watt. That these general ideas that don't actually map to physical sensations, where do we learn it from? See, he said that before a person's born, they can experience the forms, the ideals, and so when we're born, we forget them. But then, through the process of our senses, we can remember what we sensed before we had bodies of these ideals, of these forms. And if you know this mashal from Plato, and Plato is a good 400 years before Chazal, what I believe Chazal are doing is they're setting up a contrast. They're saying Plato thinks that the ideals, that the underlying fabric behind reality is a bunch of math. We're saying no, it's Torah, it's ethics. And what reminded me of this contrast, that we're saying that the more abstract reality, when you abstract away the physical, you get to these higher, that the higher planes of existence are ones about morality. So that, like, justice is what drives, justice is one of the metaphysical forces that drive the creation of our physical forces. The reason why Chazal, what reminded me of this Mamar Chazal, is that, and this way of understanding it, is look what about nature the Meshekh Chokhmah is emphasizing. We talk about, like, Avram Avinu looked around at nature and he saw there must have been a creator. And we normally think that it has to do with the elaborate design that we see in the world that is far more elaborate than what we see in a house. And if a house makes us think there must have been a builder, then of course we would conclude that the world would make us think that there's a HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But he's not focusing on engineering. He's focusing on morality. He's saying the fact that there's a morality inherent in creation is what makes me think, is how I could study the world and think that there's a God, right? Had there not been a Torah, we would have learned our midos from animals, from looking at nature. It's a very interesting difference from the way that I would have intuitively taken the first approach to how to learn about God. And there's another way to learn the necessary existence of God, al pi ha'ara elokis, by divine revelation, kederech shahaya b'matan Torah, like we had at Matan Torah. V'az hivinu then we would know about the existence of these mediating intellects that come out of Hashem's will, and they exist not by necessary existence, because only God necessarily exists, and everything else exists contingently on the fact that God wills it. This is, I believe, the first parak of Yesodei Torah in the Rambam. And after that, the details of the creation which are yet below it. One way of understanding the Torah is the understanding that God exists is called mibifnim, and the other is called mibechutz. One's called from the inside and one's called from the outside. So when we saw that the luchos could be read either from the inside or from the outside, what he's saying this is referring to is that God could be understood either from the inside, from looking at the universe outward, or from the outside, from looking at the Torah downward. And it just struck me that he may have meant that the other way. Mibifnim, from looking at the Torah inside and then extrapolating to the world, or looking at the world and deducing the morality of the Torah. Shtei hasagos ha'ela kana osan bezet Torah kriya ve'havin. These two understandings are the two ways of reading the universe, or reading the luchos, and understand well. So this is what he's saying here. He goes on to say that what was flawed in the first luchos was that we had just left Mitzrayim, and we were not ready to go from the sichlim nivdalim, from this idea of intermediaries, to the idea that there's a necessary God over it all. And therefore, when we saw the tatromolin, which is Latin for the four-faced, meaning the chayos. And one of the faces of the chayos is sometimes called keruv, and sometimes called, it depends which parak in Yechezkel you're in, one of the four faces of the chayos. So one is a man, which the Gemara learns was Yaakov Avinu's face. One is a lion. One is a nesher, which is probably some sort of vulture, although we would think it's a little more majestic than our normal mental image of a vulture. And the fourth one is either a kruv or a bull, depending upon which parak in Yechezkel we're looking at. And because we weren't ready to go from the inside, from the universe to God, we stopped at the kruv, and we decided we need to make ourselves a bull. And they tried to make a bull, and given the amount of gold, it came out a calf, and this was the origin of the eigel. Therefore, Saru Maher Min Aderech Asher Tzivisim. This is the rapid departure from the derech which I was commanding them, and it was because they weren't ready to read the luchos from both sides. This is the writing of God, that you could read the luchos both from nature and from revelation, and that this notion that we find very deeply in the Rambam, that nature and revelation are two books that tell the same truth, is what he's reading into the existence of the luchos. That the two sides of the luchos are these two books of revelation and of nature. So I hope people found these two mamarim, the one that I skimmed across and this one, interesting. Have a great evening, enjoy the rest of the week, and have a wonderful Shabbos.